before the truth was buried, she lit the first match. He wore a uniform of honor, but carried a heart full of secrets. By the time anyone heard her story, she was already ash. Jason Miller had always known how to play the part of the hero. From the outside, he was everything the American dream celebrated: a self-made man with a clean-cut appearance, a decorated career, and a sense of duty that seemed unshakable. As a senior officer with U.S. Customs and Border Protection stationed at Los Angeles International Airport, Jason spent his days overseeing cargo inspections, monitoring international shipment, and, supposedly, protecting the country from illegal trade. He was sharp, precise, and carried the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. He met Emily Carter at a university alumni event in San Diego. Emily, a middle school teacher with a love for poetry and public service, was the type of woman who left an impression not because she tried to, but because she couldn't help it. Her warmth was sincere, her laughter effortless, and her convictions unshakable. Jason was immediately drawn to her openness, a refreshing contrast to the world he had come to know. Emily, in turn, was captivated by his intelligence and sense of purpose. He made her feel protected. He made her feel seen. Their connection was fast but deep. They started dating shortly after their first meeting, and within a few months they were spending nearly every weekend together. Jason would fly down from Los Angeles on Friday evenings and return by Sunday night, claiming work commitments. He always brought gifts: a rare book she had mentioned, imported chocolate, a silk scarf from a foreign diplomat. Emily thought it was sweet, thoughtful. She didn't question where these items came from or how he had the time to find them. 6 months in, he proposed during a weekend trip to Big Sur. The ring was understated but elegant, much like Jason himself. Emily said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, held at a vineyard in Napa Valley, with only close friends and family in attendance. Emily wore a flowing ivory gown, her hair pinned with wildflowers. Jason, in a tailored navy suit, looked every bit the loving husband. Their vows were simple, their smiles genuine. To those watching, they seemed like a couple meant to last. They moved into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica, close enough to the beach for evening walks, far enough from the city for peace. Emily decorated the space with soft lighting, colorful rugs, and framed quotes from her favorite authors. Jason kept his home office minimalist, cold. Even a large desk, a locked filing cabinet, and shelves lined with law enforcement manuals. He said he needed the clarity to think. Emily didn't mind. She understood the stress of his job and gave him the space he needed. Their days followed a comforting rhythm. Emily left for school early in the morning, coffee in hand and lesson plans tucked under her arm. Jason often left even earlier, sometimes not returning until late at night. He would say things like, border seizure in Long Beach or emergency inspection at the port, and Emily accepted it without question. He was in federal law enforcement. Unusual hours came with the territory, but over time, there were small things. Packages would arrive with no return address. Brand new watches, high-end electronics, expensive cologne. Jason dismissed them as gifts from foreign contacts or seized goods that had been cleared for redistribution. Once Emily found a thick envelope of cash in the back of his sock drawer. When she asked about it, Jason said it was a contingency fund. Cash is king when you're dealing with unpredictable situations, he said with a laugh, kissing her on the forehead. She nodded, unsure. Despite these moments, Emily loved their life. She adored her students, spent weekends organizing food drives, and often hosted book clubs with her friends in the apartment. Jason was supportive but rarely involved. He claimed his job kept him too busy. The less you know about it, the better, he would joke. Emily tried not to be bothered, but sometimes, the walls between them felt thicker than they should have been. Jason, for his part, maintained the illusion perfectly. At work, he was feared and respected. He handled high-value customs cases and oversaw international inspections. His office had the air of control, clean, structured, untouchable. But behind that polished image, Jason was something else entirely. Years ago, he had discovered how easily one could manipulate the system. With the right paperwork, a container could be lost for a day. With the right connection, a shipment could be waved through without inspection. He had begun small, luxury watches, foreign liquor, electronics. Over time, the risks increased, and so did the rewards. The money came in fast and quiet. He made sure there were no obvious signs, no flashy cars, no sudden lifestyle changes. But the temptation had taken root, and the man who once believed in the badge had long since sold his conscience to the highest Bitter. Emily suspected nothing, or rather, she refused to see what didn't fit the story she believed in. She had married a protector, a man who served his country. She told herself the cash, the vague answers, the long absences, all of it, was part of the life she had signed up for. After all, Jason had never hurt her. He was affectionate, attentive, and generous, and if there were things she didn't fully understand, it wasn't her place to question them. That's what she told herself. That's what made the silence bearable. But silence can only hold the weight of truth for so long. One evening, nearly 2 years into their marriage, Emily stood in their living room, watching Jason through the window as he paced outside on the phone. His face was tense, his voice low, sharp. She couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unlike anything she had heard from him before. Something about it made her uneasy. He ended the call abruptly and walked back in, immediately softening his expression. Emily smiled back, but for the first time there was a question behind it. That night, she couldn't sleep. Something had shifted. She didn't know what yet, but she would find out. The air in the Miller home had changed. Emily couldn't put her finger on it exactly, but something in Jason's demeanor had shifted. It was subtle, the way he kept his phone face down more often, the way he closed his laptop the moment she entered the room. The warmth that once defined their evenings had cooled into polite conversation and controlled smiles. She chalked it up to work stress at first. Maybe he was dealing with a difficult case. Maybe someone in his unit was under investigation. But beneath her rationalizations, a quiet unease was growing. The turning point came one rainy afternoon, when Emily returned home early from school. A pipe had burst in one of the classrooms, and they had dismissed early. She expected to find the apartment empty, but to her surprise, Jason was there, sitting in his office, door slightly ajar, talking on the phone. His voice was low and forceful, and though she couldn't hear the full conversation, she caught a few clipped phrases. Not through that port again. Too many eyes. Cash only. No wire. Then silence. Emily froze just outside the door, heart racing. Jason suddenly stood up as if sensing someone nearby, and quickly ended the call. She rushed into the kitchen to make noise, opening cabinets, running water, pretending she'd just arrived. Jason emerged moments later, his smile as smooth as ever, but his eyes sharper, calculating. That night, Emily didn't sleep. The words replayed in her mind, each one pulling at the threads of everything she thought she knew. Was Jason involved in something illegal, something serious? Her instincts screamed yes, but her heart begged for doubt. Still, the seed of suspicion had been planted, and once rooted, it began to grow. The next day, Emily called her best friend, Vanessa Harper. Vanessa had been Emily's roommate in college and was now a practicing attorney in San Francisco, and unafraid of confrontation. Emily didn't tell her everything, only enough to test the waters. She mentioned odd transactions, large sums of unexplained cash, strange phone calls. Vanessa didn't hesitate. You need to be careful, she warned. Start documenting everything. If he is involved in something criminal, you might be in danger just by knowing. With Vanessa's help, Emily began keeping a private digital journal, encrypted and stored on a cloud drive Jason didn't have access to. Every odd phone call, every unusual package, every bank withdrawal was recorded. She quietly photographed documents left unattended on Jason's desk and later cross-referenced names she found, shipping companies, business aliases through public records. The deeper she dug, the darker the truth became. She discovered that several of the import businesses Jason mentioned in passing didn't exist. Others were flagged in old government audits for suspicious transactions. One name kept appearing, Pacific Meridian Logistics. It wasn't a company she'd ever heard Jason mention out loud, but it showed up in emails, receipts, and even on a customs badge he kept in his drawer. Emily reached out to an old acquaintance, Daniel Ruiz, a former journalist turned private investigator. She had met him years ago at a school fundraiser, and they had stayed loosely connected online. Over coffee in a quiet Pasadena cafe, she explained everything she'd uncovered. Daniel listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious. As she went on, "If what you're saying is true," he said finally, "your husband's not just taking bribes. He's part of a supply chain, counterfeit goods at best, human trafficking or narcotics at worst." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Daniel agreed to help discreetly. He began tracing shipping records and comparing customs logs. What they found confirmed her worst fears. Multiple containers listed under Jason's jurisdiction had been cleared without inspection. One, tracked to a Hong Kong-based shell company, was later found abandoned at a warehouse in Long Beach. It contained hundreds of thousands of dollars. worth of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. As the investigation grew, Emily found herself living a double life. By day, she was still the loving wife, the friendly teacher, the woman hosting book club and baking lemon bars for the school bake sale. But at night, after Jason had gone to bed or left for work, she became the spy, sifting through files, capturing screenshots, forwarding encrypted emails to Vanessa and Daniel. She never confronted Jason. Not yet. She knew instinctively that once he suspected she was onto him, everything would change. Jason, for his part, had noticed Emily's change in demeanor. She was more withdrawn, quieter during dinner, less affectionate. He chalked it up to boredom or stress. Maybe she was tired of his late nights. Maybe she missed teaching full-time. He reassured her with small gifts, a new handbag, a weekend getaway, even a surprise necklace. Emily accepted them all with a practiced smile, burying her growing fear behind gratitude that Jason wasn't stupid. He began checking his office drawer more often, setting stronger passwords, even moving certain files to a locked briefcase. One night, while Emily was in the shower, he looked through her phone. He found nothing she had already begun using. A separate device, a prepaid burner phone Daniel had given her. Around this time, Emily made contact with a federal agent named Kimberly Dawson. Through Vanessa's legal network, she'd been vetted and confirmed to be part of an internal investigations unit within Homeland Security, someone who had long suspected corruption within the LAX Customs Division. Their meeting took place in a public park, both women dressed casually, nothing obvious. Agent Dawson was clear. If you have evidence, I can escalate this, but you need to understand the moment this becomes official, you lose your shield. If he finds out what you're doing before we act, he could silence you. Emily nodded. She understood the stakes. Still, she handed over a flash drive with copies of all her findings, documents, audio recordings, photos. Agent Dawson promised to keep her name out of it, at least for now, while they launched a quiet internal probe, but time was running out. Jason had grown increasingly paranoid. He checked the house more thoroughly, sometimes returning home unexpectedly in the middle of the day. Emily once found him in her closet, claiming to be looking for an old sweater. Another time, she caught him reading her teaching journals. He apologized, said he missed the way she used to write about her day. Emily said nothing, but she knew he was watching her. The final crack came when Jason received a call from a contact overseas, someone who hinted that a woman had been asking questions, tracing routes, linking shipments. Jason put it together, faster than Emily expected. His expression changed that night. Something cold had entered his eyes. He was no longer trying to keep the illusion alive. Emily knew then that it was no longer safe to stay. She began preparing to leave quietly. She withdrew some savings to a new account under her maiden name, packed a small bag, and made plans to stay with Vanessa for a while. But Jason was one step ahead. The night before she planned to leave, he came home early. The house was dark. When she walked in, her bag had been moved. The burner phone was gone, and Jason stood in the kitchen, waiting. Emily stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her eyes locked on Jason. The lights were dim, the silence thick, and her breath caught in her chest. On the counter behind him sat her burner phone disassembled, the battery laid out next to it. Like an autopsy, Jason didn't speak at first. He only stared at her, as if trying to decide whether she was still the woman he had married, or just another threat to be neutralized. Emily's hands trembled, but she tried to keep her voice calm as she reached for a glass of water, anything to delay what she knew was coming. I found it all, he said finally, his voice low and hard. The photos, the files, the fake email account. You've been spying on me, Emily. She didn't answer. There was no use pretending now. Jason took a slow step forward, and for the first time in their marriage, Emily saw something in his face she didn't recognize. Fear, yes, but also something deeper. Desperation, rage. The kind of rage that doesn't explode, it festers, waits, chooses its moment. I gave you everything, he said, and you turned me in. Still, she said nothing. Her silence was not guilt, it was a final act of strength. Jason exhaled and turned his back to her, pacing for a moment like a man trying to reason with himself. Then, without warning, he grabbed her phone, flung it at the wall, and crossed the room in 3 strides. Emily backed away, her heels hitting the cabinets. I loved you, he hissed. And you, he stopped, his chest rising and falling. What did you think would happen, Emily? That you'd blow the whistle and just walk away? That I'd go to prison while you went back to teaching kids how to write essays? Still she said nothing, but her eyes told him everything. She had never been afraid of him until now. What happened next was quick and methodical. Jason moved like he had done it in his head 1,000 times. He yanked the gas knob on the stove, dragged Emily by the wrist toward the center of the kitchen, ignoring her struggle. She screamed. He struck her across the face. She collapsed against the tile. He poured the rubbing alcohol from beneath the sink kept there for first aid, now used for execution. The fire ignited quickly. He lit a dish towel and tossed it into the spill. The flames bloomed, catching the cabinets first, then the curtains. Jason watched for a moment, his face blank, then turned and walked out. He left the apartment door slightly ajar. By the time the neighbors noticed the smoke, it was already too late. The headlines the next morning were clinical. Santa Monica teacher dies in apartment fire. A tragic accident, said the initial reports. Faulty gas line, no foul play suspected. Jason gave a tearful statement to police. He had been working a night shift when it happened. He returned home to find firefighters surrounding the building. He was devastated, shattered. A model widower, he even organized the memorial himself, accepting condolences with glassy eyes and a folded American flag under his arm. But not everyone believed the story. Vanessa didn't buy it. Neither did Agent Kimberly Dawson. The fire report showed signs of the stove knob had been turned manually. Emily's injuries suggested she had been attacked before the fire started. The forensics were clear. This was not an accident. And then came the twist Jason didn't see coming. 2 days after the funeral, a package arrived at the office of investigative journalist Claire Monroe, known for her coverage of political scandals and corruption cases. The envelope was postmarked from a private mailing service in Sacramento, sent the day before Emily died. Inside was a flash drive labeled "If anything happens to me." The contents were explosive: spreadsheets, photos, shipping manifests, audio recordings, and a 10-minute video of Emily speaking directly to the camera. She looked composed but weary. Her eyes, though heavy, were steady. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I didn't make it. My name is Emily Miller, and I'm the wife of Jason Miller, a senior officer at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I have reason to believe he is involved in a long-running corruption scheme involving bribery, illegal trade clearance, and cover-ups. I've been documenting everything. I know this may cost me everything, but if you're watching this, then it already has." The video went viral within hours. Claire published an expose titled "The Teacher Who Dared to Tell the Truth." National news picked it up. Jason's face was everywhere. On screens, newspapers, podcasts. Not as a patriot, but as a predator. Homeland Security launched a full internal investigation. The evidence Emily had collected, now verified and public, led to the arrest of 3 other customs officials. Jason, meanwhile, was arrested at a hotel near the California-Arizona border, where he had checked in under a fake name. He had dyed his hair, shaved his beard, and carried $50,000 in cash. The trial was brutal. Prosecutors played the video for the jury, and the courtroom fell silent. Jason showed no emotion. He pled not guilty, claiming he was being framed. But the weight of Emily's evidence crushed his defense. Vanessa testified. So did Agent Dawson. So did Daniel Ruiz, who had helped Emily trace the roots and identify the shell companies Jason had used. In the end, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts: murder, arson, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and multiple corruption charges. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But justice, though served, could not undo what had been taken. Vanessa set up a scholarship fund in Emily's name, the Emily Carter Miller Fund for Girls in Public Education, dedicated to students who demonstrated moral courage and resilience. Donations poured in from across the country. Claire Monroe later published a book based on Emily's story, titled Burning Silence, which spent 16 weeks on the bestseller list. And in the courtroom, after the verdict was read, Jason was handed an envelope, one last letter from Emily, discovered in her school desk and held until the end of the trial. Inside, written in Emily's unmistakable handwriting, were just 5 lines. "I loved you, even when I began to fear you. I tried to see the man behind the silence, but the truth doesn't vanish just because it burns. Flames don't erase the facts, and truth always leaves behind ashes and light." Jason stared at the note for a long time, unmoving. Then he folded it and handed it back without a word. The story of Emily Carter Miller became more than a tragedy. It became a movement, a story of quiet resistance, a warning, a call to act, even when love asks you to stay silent, because in the end, it was Emily, the teacher, the wife, the woman who believed in truth, who had the final word.